It's been about 1 year since Avengers Endgame came out, destroying box office records and becoming the highest grossing movie in film history. But how did superhero movies go from this to this? What made this genre explode into generation-defining movies and film franchises? And how did they gain the respect they have today? Well, let's get into it. Just a disclaimer though, I'm only covering major movies and franchises, so I apologize if your favorite movie ever is Elektra or something, and it isn't on here. Comic books have been a large part of American culture since Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster first introduced us to Superman in 1938. After a few years of living on print, superheroes began to appear in serials, which were essentially TV shows, but since TV wasn't yet a common household item, people would go to the theater to watch them. Once these serials were phased out of the movie-going experience, comic books were brought to life on the silver screen with a few superhero TV shows, like George Reeves' Superman or Adam West's Batman. While this wave of moderate TV success continued, these shows didn't really translate to movies, with the exception being Batman the movie in 1966. For nearly a decade after this, the streets of the superhero movie world were silent. But then, Hollywood saw the blockbuster era. With films like Jaws and Star Wars becoming all the craze and raking in millions upon millions of dollars, Hollywood searched for its next big money grab. And finally, the first real effort by Hollywood to put one of our heroes on the big screen came in 1978, with Richard Donner's Superman starring Christopher Reeve. One of the most expensive movies at the time, Superman had a production cost of around $55 million. Which, for a superhero movie by today's standards, isn't saying much because Hollywood will throw money at anything. And I mean anything. Set against the backdrop of Metropolis, which looks suspiciously similar to New York City, this movie presented Superman as a personable hero, someone the audience can relate to and look up to. It was an important start to the genre, showing that superhero movies could indeed be successful. Unfortunately, the Christopher Reeve Superman got progressively worse with every sequel and birthed a whole series of mediocre comic book spin-offs, like, Howard the Duck. Thankfully, there remained another well-known Caped Crusader lurking in the shadows, waiting to take over the spotlight. In 1989, Tim Burton's Batman reminded the world what a comic book movie could be. Funny, original, and entertaining. Taking a slightly more serious tone than Superman and featuring a more star-studded cast with Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson, the movie was a step in the right direction. But superhero movies at this time were one step forward and a whole lot of steps backward, as yet again, the movie spawned years of mediocrity and terrible sequels. The Bat franchise deteriorated into bat nibbles and credit cards as Warner Brothers made the ingenious decision to appease kids and sell more toys, which effectively handicapped the franchise. The camp of the 90s bled into the superhero genre as we saw comic book media regress back to the Adam West era of laughable, disrespected kids content. The decade didn't go without its highlights, however, as Blade came out in 1998. This rated R movie was perhaps ahead of its time and was a precursor to some of our more serious superhero hits. At the turn of the millennium, Marvel Comics stepped up its game and began to put superhero movies back on the map. With the X-Men franchise and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, the market for comic book movies exploded like never before. Don't get me wrong, the movies were by no means perfect or taken super seriously at this point, but the formula for a somewhat campy and super entertaining comic book experience seemed to be perfected. These films dominated as action movies in the early 2000s and expanded its audience to not only kids, but anyone that enjoyed a fun and flashy superpowered experience. The first half of the decade didn't come without its missteps, though. Hollywood went scrambling to adapt almost any property they could get their hands on, which resulted in cinematic masterpieces like Catwoman and Daredevil. But for the first time in superhero movie history, you could confidently say that the good far outweighed the bad. While the world was taken by storm with this new brand of superhero movie, Christopher Nolan gave the industry a shock with Batman Begins in 2005. The director of critically acclaimed thrillers like Memento brought his dark cinematic flair to the superhero genre and broke the walls between a superhero movie and a great thriller. This revolutionary trilogy proved to the world that superhero movies were not to be overlooked. Gone were the days of bat nipples and credit cards. Instead, movies like The Dark Knight were in arguments for the best movies ever made. It was apparent now that audiences no longer wanted to see a throwback to the camp and childlike innocence of earlier superhero movies. Superhero movies now began to take a turn into the more dark and serious tone, trying and failing to mirror the success of Nolan's work. Even the Spider-Man movies, which dominated the mainstream up until Batman, attempted to go dark with Spider-Man 3, which was easily the worst movie of the franchise. Nolan's help in getting the world to take comic book movies seriously paved the way for studios to be more adventurous in how they gave audiences their comic book fix. With this newfound freedom, one studio began a generation-defining expedition. Casting an actor in Robert Downey Jr. that had been out of the spotlight and starting a superhero that wasn't exactly a household name, Iron Man was easily one of the biggest risks of any superhero film thus far. In 2008, Marvel Studios saw massive success with the movie, giving them the confidence to move forward with their bold idea of an expanded universe. Rather than creating one franchise with the same superhero, Marvel would go on to create multiple franchises in the same universe that would cross over and interact with each other. This idea turned out to be revolutionary. The 2010s saw an expansion and continuation of the cinematic universe model. The MCU grew bigger than ever, with films like The Avengers demonstrating just how well a crossover movie in an expanded universe could do. Meanwhile, Warner Brothers attempted to start up their own cinematic universe after The Dark Knight Rises saw the end of the Christopher Nolan trilogy. With Man of Steel in 2013, the studio began the DC Extended Universe, but they failed to match the success of their Marvel counterparts for many reasons. The DCEU tried a bit too hard to follow Nolan's model of a gritty, realistic take on the superhero. The problem was that in doing so, they lost the fun associated with superhero movies in general. Going as far as washing out the colors of their movies, fundamentally misunderstanding the principles of their characters by making Batman kill and Superman a criminal, the DCEU started taking the whole dark superhero movie thing a bit too far. To add on to this, they were playing catch-up with Marvel, and instead of taking their time building up the characters in their universe, they rushed to make their first huge crossover movie a mere 3 years after they started up the universe. And that gave us this.
Why did you say that name?
DC attempted to save face after multiple failures by adding more fun into their movies, which gave us this.
So that's it? What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
The DCEU was undoubtedly failing, and until recently with standout surprises like Wonder Woman, Shazam, and Aquaman, it looked like it would come to a crashing halt with the exit of Henry Cavill and Ben Affleck as Superman and Batman respectively. While DC continued to make a fool of themselves by disappointing fans and showing the world how not to do a cinematic universe, Marvel continued to hit it out of the park. While they did have some missteps with movies like Thor: The Dark World, like seriously, who even remembers this movie? They started to blur the lines of what superhero movies could be. Movies like Guardians of the Galaxy were essentially comedies with superheroes. Black Panther was a cultural phenomenon, giving an all-black cast and a black director the limelight in a major Hollywood blockbuster. The scope of these movies also started to increase rapidly. Every movie saw a new character enter the universe, all building up to the final 2 Avengers movies, with Infinity War having the biggest cliffhanger in a blockbuster movie since The Empire Strikes Back, and Endgame shattering records at the box office and capping off an impressive achievement in cinema. Just because these extended universe movies dominated the mainstream throughout the 2010s doesn't mean that the standalone comic book movies were dead. Remember how I said Blade being rated R was ahead of its time? Well, movies like Deadpool and Logan defied expectations and showed us just how far the superhero genre has come, and just how far it could go. It's safe to say that superhero movies have come a long way since the days of spandex and underwear over pants. Big-name actors have come to claim the mantle as our favorite superheroes, and lesser-known actors have been thrust into the spotlight because of playing them. New technology has made it easier to bring the fantastic and colorful comic book panels to life on the big screen. Comic book movies have evolved into better and more well-respected movies and have come to play a large part in pop culture. Whether it be TV shows, large conventions, or social media discussions, these movies have bled into everyday life, making these superheroes household names. The genre also broke new ground in the industry, and for better or for worse, defined the way movies would be made. Major studios would now look for easily marketable franchises that came loaded with hordes of pre-existing fans. Almost anything and everything could be made into a cinematic universe, from M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable to Godzilla. By demonstrating the human desire to be exceptional and giving us an escape into a wondrous and entertaining universe, comic book movies can appeal to almost anyone. And this kind of movie shows no sign of slowing down, with movies planned by major studios for at least the next decade or so. Well, with all this lockdown free time, I guess it's time to go binge the entire MCU or Dark Knight trilogy. Thanks for watching.